Shabbat Shalom. So, even though it's Elul in a few days, a time of kind of, can you hear me? Okay. Somber self-reflection, I want to talk to you today, or share with you today at least my thoughts about happiness. And though it will take a little bit to get there, I promise I'll link it to this week's Parsha. I'm going to begin by asking you a question that has been asked every year since 1972 in the General Social Survey conducted by the National Opinion Resource Center at the University of Chicago. And the question is, would you describe yourself as very happy, pretty happy, or not too happy? Very happy, pretty happy, or not too happy. I'll let you keep that to yourself. You don't have to raise your hand. If you fall into the pretty happy camp, you're part of a fairly large group that hasn't changed too much as a percentage of the whole, at least since 2018. However, if you see yourself as very happy, then you're a part of a kind of shrinking hockey stick group which is trending downwards. And if you're not too happy, you're part of a hockey stick group that is trending upwards. People who interpret surveys often look for the intersection of lines on a graph to suggest a trend. Looked at that way, it seems that in general, we are becoming less happy. Is that a surprise to anyone? We just came through a massive pandemic that taught us a harsh lesson about our striking vulnerability. Our minds know little rest as we are pulled in a million different directions by the ever-present attention economy. We don't sleep that well. Our kids are more anxious than ever before, not these kids, but, and experiencing, unfortunately, pretty horrifying rates of mental illness. We're told most recently in an opinion piece in the New York Times that we are ensnared in an epidemic of loneliness. So what's to be happy about? According to a Harris poll that has been taken for the past 9 years, only about a third of Americans consider themselves happy. We do love to measure things. It's an obsession in our data-overloaded world. We not only measure individual happiness, as I've just been talking about, but one survey tells us that Finland is the happiest country in the world. Another that Hawaii, this was until the last couple of weeks, was the happiest state in the U.S., and another that Fremont, California, between Oakland and San Jose, is the happiest city. You better be happy if you're living in Fremont, since the median price of a house there is $1.4 million. In 1988, Bobby McFerrin released the song "Don't Worry, Be Happy" from his album called Simple Pleasures. But happiness is not so simple. It's an elusive concept and highly subjective. What causes someone to be happy is tricky to determine. Is it hardwired or is it learned? What makes you happy may not make me happy. What makes you happy today may not make you happy tomorrow. I can wake up feeling very happy, and then after glancing at the front page of the New York Times, I feel like moving to a cave in the mountains. In any case, I'm not sure that there has ever been a time when the desire to be happy has ever been stronger than it is today. One researcher determined that almost 2,000 books were published about happiness in 2017 alone, up from 1,500 the year before. But we aren't getting any happier. As a matter of fact, there's abundant evidence, as I mentioned above, that the opposite may be true. Martin Seligman, one of the founders of the field of positive psychology that has become very popular, was originally known for his work in the area of learned helplessness. Seligman, however, tells the story of sitting in his backyard when his then young daughter came up to him and asked something like, "Daddy, why do you always look so sad?" That proved to be an aha moment for him, resulting in a total shift of perspective. Why, he asked himself, do we spend so much time in psychology studying pathology and nearly no time studying what causes us to thrive, to feel happy, motivated, and content? Or why is it some of us don't learn helplessness? Thus, the field of positive psychology was born, linking thriving with optimism and happiness. The concept of happiness is also fundamental to what you might call the mission of the American Republic as expressed in the Declaration of Independence, right? We read at the beginning, in the second paragraph, the most famous line that every school child, at least at one time, memorized: "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." I don't know about you, but I've often found this three-legged stool a bit perplexing. It seems that the right to life and liberty are the very conditions of a free existence, while the pursuit of happiness is an activity that might lead to the goal of happiness, but also might not. Simply put, you can pursue happiness and yet never achieve it. As a matter of fact, it seems that the harder you pursue happiness in the way we generally think about it, the less likely it may be that you ever achieve it. It's like an opiate. You need to keep upping the dose. It is very likely, however, that Thomas Jefferson and the other founders did not view happiness as the personal pursuit of pleasure. Influenced by the Enlightenment philosopher John Locke, they saw happiness as the foundation of liberty. To be happy meant using our gift for reason to make decisions in the service of our long-term best interest and well-being, rather than our immediate gratification. So maybe Locke had studied Pirkei Avot, I doubt it, where we read in chapter 4:1, "Who is rich?" Ashir, another word for happiness, by the way. Ashrei Yoshvei. "He who rejoices, hasameach, in his portion." As it says in Psalm 128, "When you eat from the labor of your hands, you are happy, happy in this world and in the world to come." That's long-term thinking. One more thing about the Declaration of Independence before turning to the Parsha. Brent Strawn, professor of Old Testament and professor of law both at Duke University, comments in an interview on the use of the pursuit of happiness in the Declaration of Independence. He says, "So now, in 2018, I continue to think that the thickest and best definition of the pursuit of happiness means we must think about facilitating the achievement of others' happiness and not be inordinately or exclusively self-obsessed with our own." I don't know for sure what Jefferson at all meant when writing that iconic line, but the moral dimension brought to it by Professor Braun is far more consistent with the Jewish view derived from the book of Deuteronomy and elsewhere. As a matter of fact, Maimonides writes rather harshly and graphically in his Mishnah Torah, "And while one eats and drinks, it is their duty to feed the stranger, the orphan, the widow," more about this in a minute, "and other poor and unfortunate people, for those who lock the doors to their courtyard, eating and drinking with their family, without giving anything to eat and drink to the poor and the bitter in soul, their meal is not a rejoicing in a divine commandment, but a rejoicing only in their own stomach. Rejoicing of this kind is a disgrace to those who indulge in it. As Scripture says," quote, and I will spread dung upon your faces, even the dung of your sacrifices, which we've just been reading about. Comes from Malachi. He doesn't mince his words there. So what does all this have to do with our parsha? Well, the word simcha is used 12 times in the book of Deuteronomy, and 7 of those times in our Parashat Reeh, whereas the word isn't found more than once in any of the other books. At least I don't think so. The primary theme of our parsha may concern God's command to centralize the place of sacrifices, worship, but the leitmotif might well be joy, happiness, the pleasure we will experience during our celebratory, familial, and communal meals in that designated place. We read in chapter 12, verse 7, and you shall rejoice, usamachtem, before the Lord your God, you and your sons and your daughters and your male servants and your female servants and the Levite who is within your gates. This isn't just an advertisement for having a good time in the place selected by God for sacrifices and holiday celebrations. This is a commandment to do so. And then again in chapter 16, verse 14, near the end of the parsha, describing the celebration of Sukkot, and you shall rejoice, v'samachta, on your festival, you and your son and your daughter and your servant and your maid and the Levite and the alien and the orphan and the widow who are within your gates. Note everyone who's included here. And in the following verse, the emphasis becomes even stronger. 7 days you shall celebrate to the Lord your God in that place the Lord chooses, for the Lord your God will bless you in all your yield and in all the work of your hands, and you shall be ach sameach, sort of utterly, completely joyful. You are commanded to be completely joyful. You might think it odd that joy or happiness can be commanded. It clearly distinguishes this kind of happiness from the mere pursuit of personal pleasure. Our own Professor Alan Cooper, in a devar he wrote on joy, which can be found on the JTS website, quotes Bachia ben Asher, a medieval Bible commentator from Spain, who writes, "The joy in the performance of the mitzvah is a mitzvah in its own right. Aside from the reward for fulfilling the mitzvah, there is a reward for the joy. Therefore, one who observes the commandment is punished for not performing it joyfully, and thus one must observe the mitzvot with joy and with complete concentration. The spirit in which one performs mitzvot matters profoundly. Perfunctory and joyless performance is not only insufficient, it leads to punishment. Unlike Bobby McFerrin, this is more like be happy or be worried. Taking a different tack, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Zichrono Livracha, writes, what Moses is articulating here in our parsha for the first time is the idea of simcha as communal, social, and national rejoicing. The nation was to be brought together not just by crisis, catastrophe, or impending war, but by collective celebration in the presence of God. No one was to be left out, no one. Not the stranger, or the servant, or the lonely. What we learn here is that happiness in our tradition is a commandment, a mitzvah, that is at once communal, radically inclusive, and deeply moral. Perhaps this is what Rabbi Nachman of Breslov meant when he said, it's a great mitzvah to be always happy. May we all experience the happiness that derives from the joy of prayer and study, from celebrating in community, from welcoming all to join in our celebrations, and from providing care and sustenance to those who need it most. Shabbat Shalom.